After 14 months of late nights, endless challenges, and countless curse words, it's finally alive. This is a homemade laptop, built entirely with desktop gaming hardware. It's designed to look and function like a real laptop you'd find in a store. It's fast, one of a kind, and built at home by an idiot. And I'm still amazed that it all came together and actually works. I love laptops, but they are kind of a scam. Look at these benchmarks for the RTX 4090 GPU. Now look at the benchmarks for the exact same GPU in a laptop. Look at this, it's nuts. Nearly half the frames per second from what is supposed to be the same card. They shouldn't even be allowed to use the same name. Well, I'm fed up and I'm out to fix that. So over the course of more than a year, I built a custom laptop entirely from scratch using only desktop gaming PC hardware. I did this partially because it had never been done before and partially because I hate myself. For all you newbies out there, I've already started this project in another video because, well, I wanted to procrastinate on editing all of this video. If you haven't seen it, here's a quick recap, and if you have seen it, there's a progress bar on the screen so you can skip ahead. Long story short, I got an AMD Ryzen 5 5600X, an RX 6600 GPU, an ITX motherboard, some very low profile RAM, a portable gaming monitor, a thin keyboard and touchpad, and a tiny DC to DC power supply. Then I started making everything thin enough to fit. I pulled apart the motherboard and, failing to desolder 3 sets of ports that were too tall, took a very risky approach by snipping them off by hand. I used a PCIe ribbon cable to allow me to lay the video card on its side and pulled off everything but the actual board to make it much thinner. I designed a lowercase in CAD, printed it out, heat welded the parts together, and reinforced everything with JB Weld to resist heat. So now let's go over the plan for cooling.
So here's the plan. I don't have one. Great.
I went in not expecting much from this since there are several issues with this setup, which I'll get to in a moment. But after a lot of mockups in Photoshop, I decided on a layout. Then the trusty Amazon deliverer brought me some goodies. To attach everything to the CPU and GPU, I got some copper shims thinner than my chances of this working, along with a mess of heat sinks short enough to actually fit in the case and a set of heat pipes. Laptops make pretty extensive use of heat pipes to carry heat away from the chips to the heat sinks, where the fans can then remove the heat from the case. And heat pipes are pretty much magic. They are a vacuum-sealed tube containing a liquid that heats up, turns into a vapor, transports heat to the other end, turns back into a liquid, and travels back to the hot end through a copper wick using capillary action, and it does all of this extremely fast. But these heat pipes are never going to line up as they are, and you're supposed to use special tools and processes to bend them into shape. But as you can see here, one of the heat pipes arrived looking like it had lost a bar fight, and I figured that would be a good test of how much function is lost by a pretty serious bend. Testing it out by dipping it in hot water, I was surprised I couldn't tell a difference between how it performed compared to the other ones. So since I was pretty sure this whole setup wasn't going to work anyway, I decided to just fail quickly and move on to the next idea. Using a metal flashlight, I got to work curving the heat pipes into the shapes I needed. It seemed worth trying. So I started to make 2 heatsink units, one for the CPU and one for the video card. I sanded everything as flat as I could, and using thermal paste, pressed the heat pipes onto the copper plates that will attach to the chips. With a small dab of glue holding them in place, I mixed some JB Weld with a bit of thermal paste to help move heat around better. Then I clamped everything in place with a lot of pressure to ensure the parts were smushed together as closely as possible to help with heat transfer. At the other end, I aligned the heat sinks with the heat pipes the best I could, even though the placement wasn't completely ideal. And 24 hours later, we have these abominations. Doing some test fitting, it all seems to line up. I put together a temporary setup for testing. Silicone sheets are taped together to keep heat away from the keyboard, fishing line through the board for mounting, and some popsicle sticks which bend nicely to provide a lot of pressure. This might be the jankiest part of the whole project, but there are a lot of other things to worry about, so we'll fix that when we need to. Probably. So I threw the original fans on them and booted it up for some stress testing. It actually seemed to be stable and temps were a bit high but not unreasonable. However, this was only the case when blasting them with the stock fans, which were not going to fit. I wanted to use these slim blower fans, but they just don't move enough air to keep things cool under load. I had trouble finding larger fans that would fit, so I decided to make my own. This design would use the stock AMD fan motor with long, thin blades to pull air in from the center intake and force it out through the opening. After putting it together and doing some test runs, it seemed to move a ton of air. I attached it to the CPU heatsinks using aluminum tape to duct the air all the way through where it can exit the case on the other end. I also modified one of the GPU fans to blow directly onto the video card. I tried making another blower fan, but it really seemed to perform best with this one, so I decided to stick with what worked. Now, to make sure everything would have enough clearance to fit, I wanted to move on to making the keyboard tray. First, I needed to get the scissor key keyboard out of its housing, which took a bit of brute force. I lost a few keys, but those can be popped back on later. Laying everything out, it seemed like it would fit, and I lined everything up so there would be room for the USB cables to plug in. With some measurements in hand, I made a simple keyboard tray in CAD. After printing it out and fusing it together, I did some trimming on the original top panel from the keyboard case so I could reuse it. After securing it with some JB Weld, I filled everything in with a filler compound and sanded it down until I had a nice smooth surface. This seemed to work, and after some paint, I was pretty amazed at how nice it looked. I just needed one more thing, a power button. I went with a kind of unique shape, and after some finishing, I hit it with a metallic copper paint, which I thought would look nice next to the flat black case. And I was so happy with how it turned out that I decided to also add some copper accents to the sides of the panel. The keyboard and touchpad were pretty easy to mount using some JB Weld, and I didn't mind how its gray color looked as a sort of touchpad bezel, so I decided to leave it. From here, I decided to move on with the LCD screen. This is a nice 16-inch QHD portable monitor with a 120Hz refresh rate, but it was way too thick to use it as is. After breaking it open, I was relieved to see that the actual LCD panel was extremely thin, and the control boards already had cables long enough that I could just put them in the bottom part of the case. It even came with tiny speakers that I could reuse for audio. Now, to hold the unwrapped LCD panel, I needed a lid. I've never found a term that I quite like for this part of the laptop, but I designed it in CAD and printed it in several parts to heat weld together like I did with the base, and reinforced with JB Weld plaster to withstand opening and closing and to hold up to higher temperatures if needed. I also made a front bezel to go around the screen and some hinges to mount everything to the bottom case. After some off-brand Bondo and sanding, it was time for some paint. But I didn't want the back of the lid to look boring. I figured this is a custom build and I pretty much have a blank canvas to work with. So I mocked up a design going with a copper and gold theme with a blue accent stripe. And since most laptops have a logo in the center, I thought mine looked weird without one. I decided to put an S from the channel logo here. I avoided going with two S's since it kind of reminded me of something else. I originally wanted a smooth copper finish, but I didn't let the body filler dry enough prior to painting, which reacted with the spray paint and cracked like crazy. But I decided to leave it because I really like the way the finish turned out. It reminds me of raw copper ore, and I thought it looked really cool. After definitely not getting sidetracked while using my airbrush gun, I had the blue accent line in place. I printed out the S from the channel logo, painted it, and glued it on the back, and I thought it looked pretty nice. Flipping the lid around, it was time to mount the LCD. This was held in place with a few globs of epoxy putty, and then I pressed the bezel in place to complete the assembly. Then I cut some pads out of silicone to act as bumpers so the LCD doesn't just slam into the keyboard tray whenever it's closed. I designed some simple hinges, which use screws to clamp down really hard on some silicone pads so I can open and close the screen without having it slam into stuff. Next, I needed a back panel to cover this nightmare of wires after I shove everything in. After printing it, I used a really thick clear paint to get a brush texture, painted it in copper, and added a carbon fiber wrap to finish it off. It just barely managed to contain everything, and I think it looks pretty good with the rest of the laptop. Finally, I wanted to make my own power connector. The external power supply was pushing out a whole bunch of amps, and I really didn't like the connector that came with the power supply. It felt extremely hot to the touch, so I made my own connector, which uses these pretty strong butt connectors to pass current through multiple wires. These two both carry 12 volt positive, these two handle 12 volt negative, and this one is a ground connection. This was designed to plug into this cutout in the side of the case, and I felt a lot safer using this more robust plug. I also ordered some battery control boards and a bunch of lithium cells, but I kind of lost interest. I don't know about you, but I've never seen much point not plugging in a gaming laptop, and the battery usually only lasts maybe 30 minutes tops anyway. I'd kind of rather leave some room in the case for better airflow, but maybe I'll come back to this in the future. Even though I'm kind of tired of looking at it after 14 months of work, I'm pretty proud of how it turned out. It's far from perfect, but I think it went alright. I'm currently working on a completely different project that I think is equally insane in its own way. To give you a quick hint, what happens when you combine this and this? So if I've earned your subscription, maybe consider giving that button a little clicky click. I've also set up a Patreon if you'd like to help buy hardware to do wacky stuff like this with. Oh, and if you haven't seen the first build video yet, then I guess now would be a good time to watch it. If you want to, I guess. Thank you for watching.